The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize through mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 5th day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in July 2019. And I'd like to continue sharing with you the teachings of Wangpo, also known as Obaku in Japanese, and taken from a book, a brand new book by Robert Buswell, a new translation of Wangpo's teachings, as well as a commentary by the Son, or that is the Korean Zen master, Subul Sanim. It is called A Bird in Flight Leaves No Traces. A bird in flight leaves no traces. It's kind of hard for a bird in flight to be able to leave traces because they have to concentrate so fully on flying. Would it be that we were so able, well, we are able, so dedicated to moving through life with that level of concentration? Unfortunately, in this day and age, there are many, many, many distractions. It's not a good situation in terms of culture, in terms of human interactions, in terms of the sharing of compassion, expression of compassion, and in terms of the level of attention span. People are so accustomed to getting their information in bites rather than paragraphs or longer writings or readings. And so their minds are getting trained not to be able to pay attention past a very short period of time, an extremely short period of time, so that we fragment ourselves through life instead of flowing. Zazen can make an enormous difference with this. But if you're having difficulty doing Zazen, it can be chalked up in part to that current state of affairs in your own mind. So this is a chapter called The Dharma Body is Like Empty Space. The Dharma Body is like empty space. The 84,000 Dharma gates that counter the 84,000 defilements are just gates intended to edify and guide. Originally, there are no such dharmas. Relinquishment is in fact the Dharma, and those who know relinquishment are Buddhas. The 84,000 Dharma gates. 84,000 Dharma gates. Dharma gates are part of the, or to work with Dharma gates, are part of the Bodhisattva vows. Dharma gates are inexhaustible. I'm not sure inexhaustible is the right way to put it. Multitudinous, perhaps, is a better word. A Dharma gate is any situation where we're caught, we're hooked, we have a reaction to somebody's personality or something they say to us. We have a reaction to a situation where we're not going to be able to do what we had planned to do or wanted to do on a given day or in a given moment. These are opportunities to turn the light inward, trace it down to the radiance, and experience our true self, and become free. 84,000 is an arbitrary number, but it matches the also arbitrary number of defilements. Wherever we are caught, certainly sooner or later there's going to be a Dharma gate opening up, giving us an opportunity to let go of that place where we're caught. And gradually, if we continue earnestly with this practice, we let go and we let go and we let go, and each letting go offers us another bit of freedom, ongoing freedom. What kind of freedom? It's not freedom to do whatever we feel like doing. It's freedom from our, as one dear friend of mine labeled it, caught places. Freedom from our attachments, at least some of them. Freedom from our automatic reactivity. All the stuff that creates suffering. As we continue to work in that direction through our practice, and the extended out-breath, called Susok'kan in Japanese, is particularly effective for this, because every time you breathe out, extending your out-breath past where you ordinarily would breathe back in again, it requires a focus. It requires a letting go, because of that focus, of other things we'd be otherwise distracted by or also multitasking. It works. With every extended out-breath offered fully, we bring ourselves more deeply into freedom. It's subtle, and the other side of that is that if there's something we don't want to open up to, some history, some negative habit pattern, we're going to be blocked in breathing that breath all the way out. So if you find yourself breathing out and suddenly you can't go past here or even past here, it's time to tune in to the felt sense of that until it melts. And when it does melt, which it will only do when you've fully tuned into it, it will dissolve and the block will be released, at least to a certain degree. And you may or may not have conscious knowledge of what that block was. But often it can be a limiting of your access for self-defense of some memory of trauma, or it can be a limiting access to try to maintain a personal self-image of a knowledge of perhaps some dysfunctional behavior on your part. Either way, to allow yourself to experience that felt sense and to continue the breath out then, which will be possible then, is to effect more deep letting go. In this way, we begin to uncover our natural way of being more completely, our innate compassion, our innate wisdom, more readily arise and be expressed. And freedom from our own stuff is the only real freedom we have. Because no matter where we are, what we are doing, whether we're caught in the deepest prison or whether out and about doing whatever we are free to do, it is still the most precious and most deep freedom and the most pure freedom a human being can experience. And it is built in. Who we really are naturally is able to express that freedom when we have let go our hindrances. So those Dharma gates are important. If you find yourself with a clutch in your chest or turning away in a little bit of anger or something like that, stop and recognize there is a Dharma gate. And in opening to the pure experience of that, in that moment, the felt sense, you're able to walk through that gateway and let go, at least to a certain degree, whatever that hindrance was that was keeping you trapped. To continue with Wangpo, the 84,000 Dharma gates that counter the 84,000 defilements are just gates intended to edify and guide. Originally, there are no such dharmas. Relinquishment is, in fact, the Dharma, and those who know relinquishment are Buddhas. If you simply abandon all defilements, there will be no dharmas that can be ascertained. Now, that sounds very simple, but it is not so easy to accomplish. This is lifetimes of work. Letting go, grasping, letting go clinging, letting go little by little, the accumulation of greed, anger, and most of all, the ignorance of the true nature of reality that we have adopted willy-nilly over lifetimes. Little by little, letting go, letting go. Letting go, as people have already experienced in these 5 days of sesshin. Concentrated, focusing, extending the out-breath, letting go, moment after moment after moment, dealing with whatever it is that might come up that seems to inhibit that. Frustration, resistance, that block. And then there are other times when our practice seems to sail along seamlessly. It's amazing what this practice can do. If you practitioners of the way want to know the essential akromata for attaining enlightenment, simply add not a single thing to the mind. This is basic and profound. What is akromata? It is an ancient Greek word that is translated essentially as something you hear which is not meant to be written down. If you practitioners of the way want to know the essential akromata for attaining enlightenment, simply add not a single thing to the mind. The statement, quote, "the true body of the Buddha is like empty space," close quote, is an analogy for this. We accumulate opinions, we accumulate assumptions, we accumulate history of conditioning. That's quite a weight to carry around. And it is a weight. Because until we can let it go, we're a prisoner to it. And it's a recipe for suffering. The Dharma body is empty space, and empty space is the Dharma body. People always say that the Dharma body pervades empty space, and empty space subsumes the Dharma body. They're not aware that the Dharma body is empty space, and empty space is the Dharma body. If you definitively claim that empty space exists, then empty space is not the Dharma body. If you definitively claim that the Dharma body exists, then the Dharma body is not empty space. Do not develop an intellectual understanding of empty space. Empty space is the Dharma body. Form is empty, emptiness is form. The Prajnaparamita teaches the same thing. This is the core, deep teaching of the Buddha. Empty space and the Dharma body do not have different characteristics. The Buddhas and sentient beings do not have different characteristics. Birth and death do not have different characteristics. Birth and death do not have different characteristics. Most human beings fear death. Yet, here's Obaku saying, birth and death have not different characteristics. This is something to wordlessly plumb, probe. Birth and death do not have different characteristics. The Buddhas and sentient beings do not have different characteristics. Birth and death do not have different characteristics. Samsara and nirvana do not have different characteristics. Defilements and bodhi do not have different characteristics. Leaving far behind all characteristics, that is Buddhahood. Ordinary people cling to sense objects. Practitioners of the way cling to the mind. To forget both the mind and sense objects is true Dharma. We do cling to sense objects. We want pretty things. We want people to love us. We want possessions. We want good looks. We don't want to get old. We don't want to die. How many of these things do we hang on to? And awakening is to let go. So completely, at least momentarily, that you experience the great joy of not clinging. Mitra-roshi, Mitra-roshi, talks about his teacher Mumon-roshi, who, when he was assigned to a different temple, simply took his robes and his bowls and went. Didn't take anything else with him. He simply went to the new temple to take over and to teach there. It is relatively easy to forget sense objects, but extremely difficult to forget the mind. People do not dare to forget the mind because they fear that they will fall into emptiness, where there will be nothing to hold on to. They do not understand that emptiness is originally not empty. It is simply the one true Dharma realm. That's all. But don't use that as a comfort blanket. People fear to forget the mind. In this case, it sounds like what they're translating as mind is a sense of self, our self-image. And that is something that does come up for people at a certain point when they're getting close to breaking through. It can feel like we're going to disappear. It can feel like we're going to die. Anxiety comes up. Letting go, particularly for people who've had a challenging life, is not something done easily. People whose lives have been challenged by trauma or even difficult situations that might not actually qualify as trauma, but still are difficult. We try to control. We try to control our environment. We try to control the people around us. And in fact, there is a psychological diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, which involves creating chaos around the person who has got that diagnosis to keep everything off balance, at least in part, so they can feel like they're a little bit safer than they would be otherwise. It's also a means to avoid feeling the terrible traumatic feelings that that are hidden because diagnosis of personality, borderline personality disorder, is highly linked to a history of childhood trauma. We human beings try to compensate in whatever way we can. And collecting things, whether it's an identity, whether it's possessions, whether it's friends, people, can be a defensive mechanism. Daring to metaphorically walk naked through life offers an immense level of freedom. And since we really cannot ever truly own anything, it makes sense. There are cultures where things are given away, possessions are given away. The Native American cultures have that quality. Everything is shared. In Anglo, or so-called Anglo cultures, we generally don't go so much in that direction. And yet I think about a friend of mine, Karen was her name, who when she was a child in school, her teacher was talking about gratitude and generosity, and mentioned that it would feel wonderful to give away something that we had, that we really valued, that we really wanted to have. And so she ran home after school and picked out the very toy that she most treasured and gave it to a friend. And she said that the result for her was this immense feeling of gratitude, of joy in the doing of that. We're that way, we can be that way about giving away our attachments too. In fact, the joy that is common among people who have a deep enough Kensho experience comes from letting go, relinquishing a certain level of attachments. The 84,000 Dharma gates. We have lots of opportunity to do that. And when we do, it will change our lives. And it will change others around us as well. As we gradually learn to let go, as we gradually become aware of where we need to let go or where we can let go, particularly of habit patterns of personality. Mitra-roshi was a human being. When I first encountered him, he was in his 50s. He was, in terms of astrological signs, he was a Leo, which means high profile, loved to talk, loved to be on stage, and he was quite entertaining. He also had some habit patterns, and these really grabbed some people. Yet his entire life that I knew him, all the way until he was in his 90s and died deeply peacefully in the garden at the Rochester Zen Center, surrounded by his students. He constantly worked on himself. As soon as he saw where he was caught in a habit pattern that was creating negativity of some level, it was gone. It was amazing. I witnessed it many, many times. Each of us can do this as well. Part of the challenge is we don't know where we're caught in negative habit patterns. But with the Zazen, we become little by little aware of these habit patterns that are creating suffering to ourselves and to others. And as soon as we become aware and own them, and this is an important part of it, turn our backs on it, try to stuff it back in its box or its bag, doesn't work. We're still caught then. But if we open our arms and embrace the pain of having lived that way, of caused the pain or the frustration or the whatever to other people by acting that way when we didn't even realize it, then it's so easy to let it go. And then gradually we become free of our accretions, and we're able more deeply to go within and realize more deeply some level of the true nature of reality. Part of it, of course, is realizing where this thing we think we are is just a myth. But it's scary to let it go, because, as is said here, we're afraid we'll end up in emptiness, and then what? And again, the analogy of the little bird being pushed out of the nest in order to learn to fly. We too, when we don't have this straitjacket of self-image around us that we need to protect, we need to never stray from, when that begins to dissolve, the freedom to move in other directions is amazing. Maybe there's a different direction to move in that's more appropriate, more enlightened, and we can go there. But it requires the hard work of seeing where we are caught. As a friend of mine said long, long, long ago, after having had a Kensho during a sesshin, this practice is truly bodhisattvic. First, it shows us where we're caught, and then it sets us free. But it only sets us free if we're willing to own where we're caught. And somehow seeing where we're caught is a prerequisite to owning it and letting it go. It's kind of hard to change a behavior you don't even know you have. It's kind of hard to change a mind state you don't even realize you've got. A practice, in a certain way, it's like putting ourselves under a microscope. Uncomfortable, perhaps, but a little discomfort in the service of becoming truly free is a small price to pay. Ajahn Chah, who was a Thai Buddhist forest master, would say there are two kinds of suffering. There's temporary suffering and there's permanent suffering. A temporary suffering is a suffering you undergo when you're doing your meditation practice, when you're doing your Buddhist practice. It's difficult, but it's temporary because you see through it pretty soon, and then it's gone. A permanent suffering is a suffering that doesn't leave you unless you do take some action, like the practice. The 84,000 Dharma gates offer tremendous potential for all of us to free ourselves. And in that freeing of ourselves, that naturally pervades the whole universe, that freedom. Other people are deeply influenced by it. I think that's enough for today. The most important thing is to take this amazing practice and run with it. Give yourself to it. Sure, it's difficult at times. Sometimes it's really difficult at times. Sometimes you just want to quit. But the potential is incredible to offer you nothing but total enlightenment, true liberation. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.